As the Ketanji Brown-Jackson Supreme Court hearings wrap, and despite the controversies, it is expected her nomination will be confirmed in early April, all but a guarantee now with Senator Manchin's announcement of support. It's amazing to consider just how bad some of the judges' answers were. And I get it, when you take a grilling for several hours straight, it's tiring, it's frustrating, you're bound to make some mistakes. But the thing is, Ketanji's worst answers weren't actually on surprise attacks at all. They came with explicit advance warning. Outside of the "what is a woman" insanity, the most controversial piece of the judge's history and testimony is her record on child pornography sentences, more lenient than prosecutors' asks and federal sentencing guidelines in every case that she's handled. And for whatever you think of the fairness or accuracy of that criticism, there's no way to claim it was an ambush. Senator Hawley, leading that line of attack, publicly published his case last week and told the judge personally on Monday, "These are the specific cases I am going to ask you about. I'm not looking to smear you. I'm looking for your fair, prepared explanation."
Some have asked, why did I raise these questions ahead of the hearing? Why not wait until the hearing? I'm not interested in trapping Judge Jackson. I'm not interested in trying to play gotcha. I'm interested in her answers because I found in our time together that she was enormously thoughtful and I suspect has a coherent view and explanation and a set of thinking, way of thinking about this that I look forward to hearing.
And yet, Jackson's apparent prepared answers included, "I don't know the specifics of that case.
I don't remember in detail this particular case, but I do recall it being unusual."
Even though that specific case was cited ahead of time to give her the benefit of preparation. But even "I don't know my own record" is still a better answer than, "Yeah, well, this is the sort of crime that happens to the best of us unwittingly." In between browsing Facebook and shopping on Amazon, who hasn't accidentally distributed a few thousand child porn images?
You can receive, you can distribute tens of thousands. You can be doing this for 15 minutes, and all of a sudden, you are looking at 30, 40, 50 years in prison.
Good.
Who knows? You might spend only 15 minutes committing one school shooting, and then all of a sudden, you're looking at life in prison. Yes, a whole lot of crime can fit into just a few minutes. And that's a truth that's certainly not unique to this one. Even serial killers spend 99.9+% of their lives not murdering. But it's the brief murdery parts that the law is concerned with. And why should crime committed digitally deserve more lenient punishment anyway? If I rob you by hacking your Venmo, is that a lesser crime than physically plucking the cash from your wallet instead? And as though it's so common or understandable anyway, if you're watching this video, you likely have years or even decades of internet experience behind you, and yet that history includes not 15, but exactly 0 minutes of child pornography distribution or consumption. I guess you're one of the lucky few. Your days of nobility and virtue are apparently numbered. It is baffling that with warning and preparation time, these are among the best answers that Jackson and her team could come up with, when there's a much more plausible one to go with. And in fairness to her, she did go with it. She just muddled it up by straying away from it to much worse and sillier arguments. It's not a rationale I agree with, but it's a lot less clownish than "I don't know my own record," even with advance notice to look it up, and "whoopsie, I accidentally uploaded thousands of child porn files to YouTube instead of this video." It goes like this. Current federal law insufficiently distinguishes between production and possession or sharing. And producing the material is worse than simply consuming it or sending it to somebody, because production means the direct abuse of a child. And to the extent that judges have full discretion in sentencing these cases, by virtue of a 2005 Supreme Court case that made congressional sentencing guidelines advisory and not mandatory, federal judges have, as a trend, sentenced possession and distribution on the lower end of the sentencing range. A 2021 report from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, of which Brown-Jackson is the former vice chair, found that in 2019, 59% of non-production offenders received sentences below the guideline range as a result of this issue. Enhancements that were designed to apply only to the most serious cases now apply to most cases in general, because computer and internet storage and distribution of the material has put it on a scale much larger than when the law was written. And of course, that's not an argument without its flaws. It's just an argument that pushes Jackson more into the judicial mainstream rather than some outlier. But the question remains, what if the mainstream is wrong? And not just wrong on the question of what are the appropriate sentences for these offenders, but wrong on the question that's more central to her confirmation, wrong on judicial philosophy. Because fundamental to this argument that Congress hasn't appropriately updated the law to meet the times is that judges should correct that issue. That if judges decide that the law isn't modern enough or kind enough or considerate enough or is otherwise subjectively deficient, that judges should insert their own policy preferences to correct that matter. And that is an argument that takes a very clear side on what is more important, the application of the law as written or the judge's personal political opinions. And it's not as though prioritizing personal political opinions over the law has stopped the confirmation or careers of justices prior. In many ways, that too would be a continuation of the norm, regardless of what the law says. But the trouble isn't just that it's the wrong philosophy. It's that it's in opposition to the philosophy that Jackson herself claims to hold. It's not just a contradiction with constitutional fidelity. It's a contradiction with Jackson's own testimony. The hearing's first questions came customarily from Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, who was trying to get out ahead of all of this incoming criticism. One of those criticisms being potential judicial activism, judging cases based on what you want the law to be instead of what the law is. And so Dick Durbin asked Jackson about her judicial philosophy. And if you only read the transcript, you'd think it was Scalia or Thomas talking.
So would you like to comment at the outset of those who are looking for a label, what your position is on judicial philosophy?
Adherence to text is a constraint on my authority. I'm trying to figure out what those words mean as they were intended by the people who wrote them. I'm looking at original documents. I am focusing on the original public meaning because I'm constrained to interpret the text. I am not importing my personal views or policy preferences. The entire exercise is about trying to understand what those who created this policy or this law intended.
And hey, that's great. To the extent that you believe her. Is that sincere philosophy? Is that just lip service? I'd say decide for yourself, but Jackson and her team have already decided for you. The exact opposite is their argument to justify her sentencing in the child porn cases. In that situation, the text and the intent of the statutory authors is not, in fact, constraining. It is not, in fact, the most important consideration. All of that is secondary to the judge's view of how modern times change the application of that law.
The original law was written at least 9 or 10, maybe longer, years ago, and the quantity of material was relevant to the sentencing. And now that we have computer access to voluminous amounts of material, it has raised questions, has it not, within the judiciary as to the appropriate sentencing in today's circumstances.
The guideline was based originally on a statutory scheme and on directives, specific directives by Congress at a time in which more serious child pornography offenders were identified based on the volume, based on the number of photographs that they received in the mail. And that made total sense before, when we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have distribution. But the way that the guideline is now structured is leading to extreme disparities in the system because it's so easy for people to get volumes of this kind of material now.
Okay, but even if we grant changes in technology and disparate outcomes as concerns, the question is, concerns for whom? Who writes the law that should consider these factors? Is that Congress's job? Or is that a judge's job? Jackson told us just 10 minutes prior to this exchange that is not a judge's job. Yet here she is accepting and expanding on Durbin's premise that Congress didn't get it done, so now it's up to her to do it from the bench.
And in fact, what we're dealing with here is an issue which even this committee and members on the committee have been loath to address again.
Congress tells judges what we're supposed to do when we sentence. But as it currently stands, the way that the law is written, The way that Congress has directed the Sentencing Commission appears to be not consistent with how these crimes are committed, and therefore there's extreme disparity, as you pointed out.
Right. So it's Congress's job, unless Congress does a bad job, because then it's my job. And the only measure of bad is what? Her own subjective personal opinions, she originally said, have nothing to do with her decision-making as a judge. And for my money, without diminishing the seriousness of the other issues, that was the most disqualifying moment of these hearings. Awfully ironic, considering that was the first exchange designed to protect her from the damage to come. But all the damage was already done by her own reasoning and that of her handlers, which makes it even worse to me, because this is what she explained with preparation and forethought. This is not something she was trapped into by a stressful moment or some surprise attack. What she said there is that the law as it's written is the most important unless and until I decide it was written poorly, in which case, as it's written is not the most important, my own personal discretion is. That is not the philosophy of a neutral arbiter, as she claimed to be. That is the philosophy of a queen who believes that she holds the ultimate right to transform the law as she wants it to be, not apply the law as it was written, even if it was written poorly, badly, or unwisely. That's not a philosophy that belongs anywhere on the bench, but at least in lower courts, that thinking can be overturned. Put that thinking on the Supreme Court, though, and as we've seen with way too many landmark cases prior, it creates new law out of thin air that applies to everybody in the entire country with a lifetime appointment to do it and no direct accountability to the people. When laws are bad or insufficient, the mechanism to fix them is exactly that. It's the people through their chosen representation, not the supposed wisdom of unelected black-robed elites. That is the principle on which this nomination ought to be opposed. But like many other political lessons these days, it looks like we're content to learn this one the hard way rather than think about it carefully ahead of time. But I guess if Jackson just proved anything, it's that thinking about things ahead of time is highly overrated. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.